My name is Ann Farkas, and I'm a program assistant here at Fairfield Public Library. Today is Monday, June 28th, 2021. We are recording this event this evening so that we will be able to enjoy this in the future. Again, as I mentioned, we have 156 registrants who are going to be joining us this evening for the conversation with Chef Michel Nischan, which is going to be moderated by Raleigh Wiesen. Raleigh is the co-founder and executive director of the Jacques Pepin Foundation. He's a culinary instructor and associate professor at Johnson and Wales University in Providence, Rhode Island, and the husband of Claudine Pepin. I meant to go over just a little bit of logistics for this evening. Raleigh is going to be spending a lot of time with Michel. They have a lot to cover. So if you have a question that you're dying to have answered, please put it in the chat box and we will get to as many as we can. But we may also save those questions until the very end so that they can stay focused. They've got a lot they want to cover with us this evening. I think a registrant summed up everything by saying, very excited to be part of this event this evening with this amazing, capital A, human, capital H, being, capital B. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Raleigh, who will introduce you to Michel. Thank you.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Ann. And it's really a pleasure to be with all of you today. Thank you for taking an evening out of your summer. For some of us, it's a beautiful summer night. It's apparently there's some people calling in from Seattle where it's 105 degrees today. Oof, that must be crazy out there in the Pacific Northwest, but we're glad to have all of you with us. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us. As Ann mentioned, I'm here with my dear friend and comrade in arms, Michel Nischan. Michel is been an incredible inspiration to me, as well as an inspiration to many in the nonprofit world and in the food world. He has successfully run a number of restaurants, published several cookbooks. He's been a contributor to the television series, the Victory Garden, which some of you might remember back in 2008. And more importantly, he's been just an incredible advocate for the underserved populations, the food insecure, those whose health could be improved through access to fresh fruits and vegetables. And really, I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to speak with Michel and to share it with all of you. So Michel, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Raleigh. Appreciate it, man. Thanks for the generous introduction.
And thanks to Ann and everybody at the Fairfield Public Library. This is a really great opportunity. This cooking series is really terrific, and it's great that you're bringing these kinds of opportunities to your public and to the general public. So we appreciate this invitation and you providing it open access to so many people. Just jumping right in. So Michel, obviously you had this incredibly successful career in food, in restaurants, and working as a professional food service person. And of course, well, maybe you want to tell us a little bit about your background, like your childhood. I know that food was really important to your family when you were a kid.
Well, I was, I actually thought that my upbringing was normal, but it was actually quite unique. My mom and my dad both came from farm families, and my mom, her father, my grandfather Campbell, kind of held on to his farm the best that he could and really relied on myself, my older brother, and about 30 of our cousins. My mom was one of 13, to come down every summer and spend about 6 to 8 weeks working the farm, because he really couldn't afford the farm workers he needed to keep it going. And that's where I learned how to raise animals, raise vegetables, how to cook and can and cure and take the life of an animal with as much dignity as possible and then turn it into something delicious. And interestingly, I just assumed, because so many of the kids that I was going to school with, grade school back in the 60s, also had parents who were farmers, but what I didn't know is they had left the farming business. No one had that connection. So I love that upbringing, really. It was my mom who really took me under her wing because she loved how much I loved to cook and how much I connected with cooking. So I am the repository of all of the Nischan and Campbell family recipes from all of those years. And that's actually what informed me. I had no formal training when I got into the restaurant business. It really was kind of a survival mechanism. My mom and dad fell on hard times when I was graduating high school. Me and my older brother had to move out because they had to downsize. So, my brother was a little bit in the weeds for work, but my mom's like, Michel, you got it made. You get a job in a restaurant, you get a meal a day and a paycheck. So that's how I kind of got into it, and the rest is history.
That's such a great story. And the funny thing for me as a professional in food service, as a professional chef, and for many of us, we would all kill to have that experience as kids, to learn how to grow stuff and how to can stuff and how to harvest animals and just make the most out of everything. That's something that we all tried to learn once we got into food service. Once you started cooking in restaurants, and maybe it wasn't until you were a sous chef or even a chef, how did that inform your understanding of the power of food as a chef?
Well, it's interesting. My first real connection to the power of food was the journey was a little weird. First, I was like really disappointed because when you spend your life growing up knowing what a ripe tomato is, and then you start working in the restaurant business, and I was working in some pretty nice restaurants in the Chicago area. Some of the top restaurants of the day, Le Perroquet and L'Escargot and Le Tour at the Park Hyatt. The tomatoes coming in the back door of the restaurant were not great. The quality of the meat of the animals that were coming in at the time, and this was at the height of the technology of wet pack cryovacking loins of beef and veal and lamb and things, and I was just like, I'm like, everything is just so wet. And on the fruits and vegetables, everything was just so dry, and it was supposed to be the other way around. It's like meat's supposed to be pretty dry if handled properly, and fruits and vegetables should be replete. I mean, you should be able to break a sweet potato in half, and little beads of white milk should be forming at the break. And I just didn't see that in the food. So I did, my first job, as a sous chef, I was a little bit of a pain in the ass to my chefs because I kept saying, I'll bet we could find farmers and we could get, let's look at key things, peppers, tomatoes, basil, cucumbers, things that require juice, fresh dug potatoes. There's got to be somebody out there that we can buy from. And they just thought I was the wackiest guy in the world. So when I finally was a chef at a restaurant called the Fleur de Lis in 1980 in Milwaukee, I went out to the countryside and learned that there weren't any farmers that were doing that. So I had to find a young couple actually who was growing, doing a coarse corn, soy, and oat rotation. And their parents had been specialty crop farmers, which means fruit and vegetable farmers. But they went into the rotational cereal and oilseed crops because that's where the money was. And they're like, we could do, if you pay it. I said, let's do the seed planting. I'll pay you half in advance and I'll pay you the rest when you deliver it. And they're like, we'll grow it, we'll weed it, we'll water it, it'll be great. But in the fall, we're going to be harvesting oats, corn, and soy. You can come and get it. So, and you have to pay us when you pick it up. So, that's, the interesting thing was after we went through all that trouble, and I was really kind of scratching my head as to whether I had gotten myself in over my head or if I was actually even doing the right thing. And I was clearly disappointed at the lack of the type of farming culture that I just thought was normal when I was a kid. All changed when customers of mine started responding to the food that we were feeding them. And it was pretty stunning to have customers come into the restaurant and say to me, I haven't had a tomato this good since I was a kid. And this is like a 40 or 50-year-old investment banker or, someone who'd, achieved some modicum of success. Or I haven't tasted produce this amazing or an animal a piece of meat this good. I have to go to Europe to experience this. So that's when I really understood that there was this opportunity to reconnect people with real food. That was kind of my first form of advocacy.
Wow, that's incredible, and it brought to mind as you were saying that in the 80s. I mean, that would have been at the same time that Alice Waters was sort of having the same revelations out there in California, and thinking like, oh, we can actually go to the farmers and we can get this.
Yeah.
You know, of course, the farmers out there were actually already growing those specialty
Yeah.
crops, so it was probably a little easier for her. She didn't have to talk anybody into it. She just had to actually bring it home.
Well, you know, and the interesting thing about that rally is Alice was doing, she started like in the mid 70s, as did Odessa Piper in Madison, Wisconsin, which is close to Milwaukee. And there was a farmer's market in Madison that I ended up going to in like 83. I had heard about it and I marveled at all of the different heirloom varieties that were growing that I didn't know about. But it just, everybody, there were like this handful of chefs who were doing it on their own. We were just kind of like, we knew that the food could be better. We knew that for the food to be better, we had to forge these relationships of trust with these agricultural producers who generally kind of got screwed by the system, right? So there's a lot of mistrust and trepidation on their behalf. Hence you pay somebody half in advance. It's a form of crop insurance. They can plan it, and they know you're not going to be flippant and turn your back on them and leave them holding, a couple of acres of stuff, right? So that energy was there, but none of us knew each other because we were just so busy trying to forge these relationships and get decent food in the back door of our restaurants and into the bellies of our consumers.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm going to jump forward a little bit. I know we were in the mid 80s there, but I think it's really interesting that you opened the dressing room there in Connecticut in 2006 or so, somewhere right around then.
Yes.
Obviously was a super successful restaurant, and your community loved it, and you were making terrific food, which is always the best way to run a restaurant is to make great food. But it's interesting to me that you founded Wholesome Wave at almost the same time. You started Wholesome Wave in 2007. Did Lori just think, really, we need another business at the same time? How did that work out? Oh, you're frozen. Am I the only one that's frozen? Who's frozen?
No, you're not frozen, but yeah, Michel's frozen for me.
He was frozen earlier as well.
I'm actually the co-host, so I actually let him back in, so there may be a moment or so. Is he here? Good.
I am here. Sorry about that, guys.
Great.
So I'm sorry, Raleigh, you were saying dressing room, good food. Thank you.
Dressing room, great restaurant, great food, made a lot of people happy. But then you started Wholesome Wave almost at the same time in 2007. I'm sure that Lori was like, really, Michel, do we need another business at the same time? What was the impetus for getting Wholesome Wave started?
Well, look, Wholesome Wave was a much longer journey than that. The timing, just, it's not an indicator of the struggle and the thought that went into the founding of Wholesome Wave. It really started kind of in '94 when my son Chris, who you know well, was diagnosed with type 1, and that's the first time I ever made a connection between food and human health, and that was like a deepening of the understanding of the power of food. Is that, wow, that's I knew, I believed in you are what you eat. If you eat clean and you eat wholesome and you eat lots of fruits and vegetables and you eat as organically as possible, that it's a lot better for you than the other stuff. But that was about the extent of it. So we made that connection, and we had a really forward endocrinologist from Yale, Patricia Egan, who convinced us that what we would do with Chris's food plan would have more to do with the length and the quality of his life than anything. So that was wow, I got this, I'm a chef. But then within 3 months of doing all the research I did, because back in the early 90s, there were some misassumptions about what you should and shouldn't be eating. We had the science of assumption. The public health community still believed, because the Framingham studies weren't complete, that fat made you fat, that eating things that had cholesterol gave you high cholesterol, which we've learned isn't true. But back when I was doing the research, that was the science that we had available. And I was just like, within 3 months, I'm like, wow, I'm feeding my customers something I would never feed my family. Even though it was local, even though it was organic, even though it was sustainable, I was backstroking in butter and foie gras and heavy cream, and and it was really weighing on me. I was not sleeping at night. Created a restaurant in partnership with Drew Nieport in '97 called Heartbeat in the First W Hotel. So,
Right.
Restaurant of well-being. No butter, no cream, no sugar, no flour. How do you make sauce? How do you make dessert? And it was a real risk, but we did it. We got 3 stars in the New York Times, 0 stars in the New York Post. Got accused of being the food police. So we were controversial and busy, which led to me being invited to a number of think tanks with Walt Willett from Harvard School of Public Health and others, where I learned about things like the social determinants of health, the social barriers that exist that prevent a human being from being able to lead a healthy life, access to education, access to transportation, access to safe housing, safe neighborhoods, food, nutritious food, affordable food. And I really connected to the food thing, and I really learned about type 2 diabetes, which is wildly more prevalent than type 1 diabetes and can be prevented through or reversed through diets. So we created Heartbeat Restaurant to do that, and learned that I could only do it for people who could afford the $30 entree. That when you have the family of 4 that has $2 on food stamps for dinner tonight, for all 4 people, 50 cents a person, there's no business model for that. There's no menu for that. It's not McDonald's. It's not Kentucky Fried Chicken. It's ramen noodles with condensed milk. It's Easy Mac with a half a can of tuna stirred in. So I was really from like 99, when I really started learning about social determinants and these barriers for people struggling with poverty. I went into that sleepless night mode, because I almost felt guilty that I could provide this food for my customers. My customers could have it because they could afford it. What do we do about the millions of Americans who have $2 for dinner tonight? So that's the energy that actually led to Wholesome Wave. But when I told Paul, the same way you and I are having this conversation now, he's like, why don't you open a damn nonprofit? You have some good ideas, and maybe you'll sleep at night. So, and Newman's Own Foundation was actually our founding donor to get it started. So the timing of Dressing Room opening in 2006 and Wholesome Wave opening in 2007 actually is kind of correlated there.
Right. That's amazing. I had the good fortune. I was living in New York City in the 90s, and I remember eating at Heartbeat and thinking like, wow, this is out of this world. Like who does this, right? Who tells you about the wheatgrass that's going to be in your cocktail? I mean, that was
somebody who can't sleep at night.
That was a whole new approach to food. It was just incredibly innovative. And, fact is, you were probably a little bit ahead of your time. That would have lasted a little longer if you brought that out in 2010 rather than in the mid-90s.
Yeah.
Mid 90s, I was still eating foie gras and heavy cream too. So that was a exciting time for us foodies. But so that's pretty amazing. I mean, and when I think about all the work that that Wholesome Wave has done, so that was a great auspicious beginning, and you had already started to make these connections in your mind between chefs, producers, the food insecurity, the nutrition specific necessity, these barriers to health and wellness. I mean, I don't think very many people have really made that great connection and understand that sort of complexity of the food system in the way that you just laid it out pretty simply, like, oh, we've got farmers that are making great food and we need to make people healthier. So how do we bring that together? So once you had drawn that line, connected those dots, where did you go? What did you try to do?
Well, what I wanted to do is I tried to learn, and one of the reasons why it took so long to actually form Wholesome Wave is I was learning. At first I thought, that it was an education issue, lack of knowledge issue. I really thought that until I was at a farmer's market in Worcester, Massachusetts, run by Hmong, Cambodian, and Zhang Chinese farmers for their these were farmers from Western Mass, and they set up the market in Worcester because there were Cambodian immigrant and refugees, Chinese, Vietnamese, etc. And they were growing the food of their heritage. So they had a marketplace for it. And I remember being there, and there was this one Hmong farmer from the Khmer growers of Western Massachusetts who was selling fuzzy melon, which are about this big, twice the size of your head, and they got hair like this long. Looks like a giant fat cucumber or an elongated watermelon with hair on it. And she was selling them for $1. And I saw an African-American woman who spoke only English, Hispanic-American man with like 3 children who only spoke Spanish, the farmer who only spoke Hmong, and they're just like doing the weirdest sign language in the world because the Hispanic guy and the black woman are trying to figure out what to do with the fuzzy melon because it's big and it's $1, right? So she finally, she's, and everyone's like, what are you trying to say? So she pulled out her lunchbox and took a fork and put a little piece of paper on the table and put 2 little piles of this like fuzzy melon, kind of like looked like some kind of like a curry salad with like peanuts or whatever on the paper. They both ate it and they both bought some. So it's kind of like, I'm like, all this stuff about education, people aren't buying broccoli because they don't know it's good for them. They're undereducated, whatever it might be. Here were 3 complete different diverse ethnicities, and the whole also the cultural appropriate thing, which is a valid argument, but here are 2 people who were clearly out of their comfort zone trying to figure out what to do with something this big that was $1 because they could afford it. So my thought was, wow, maybe it's not education. Maybe it's the affordability thing, and I remember the woman, the African-American woman saying, I'm going to buy 2 of these because that's a lot of food for $2. So I'm like, wow, value trumps everything. You motivate somebody with a value, they'll self-educate. They'll go through uncomfortable sign language with someone who doesn't speak their language to try to figure out what the hell to do with something that's $1, right? So that's where I got the idea. It's like, what if we use private money to raise the financial resources to encourage people to make it more affordable for them to buy the fruits and vegetables and see if that works? So we thought of it 2-for-1 fruit and vegetable sale, right? The one thing that I had already learned is that donating produce wasn't working really well. That, you give a Haitian family, broccoli and lettuce and radishes, and they look at it very oddly, and people misperceive that as they're not grateful. And what it is they don't know what the hell it is. But if you gave them that same box and it had breadfruit and callaloo, in Tioba and yucca or manioc in it, they would hug you until your bones broke and take that box home with them, right? The thing about giving people the money to choose, it does 2 things. One is it evaporates those cultural barriers because people can buy the fruits or vegetables that resonate with them the most. The second is that it's not a handout. You're not taking whatever is in the box, often not very fresh, not the highest quality. And it's just, the system works against food banks. Refrigeration is expensive. Grocery stores don't want to donate perfectly good produce because they paid premium price for it. So they donate it when it's at the end of its use state and it's not that great. So we just wanted to have dignity, show choice, and we knew that the transaction would be trackable. So that's how we kind of started. We started just raising private money, doubling food stamps when spent on fruits and vegetables at farmers markets, and it frickin' took off.
That's amazing, and that's such a incredible signature accomplishment of Wholesome Wave. That idea of doubling food stamps, SNAP benefits at farmers market, which benefits the farmer, benefits the people that are food insecure, allows them to choose the product that they want and take home the food that they can best feed their families with. It's still I've known about it for years, but it still strikes me as genius. It's really incredible, and you should be commended for that. And then in addition, going through the advocacy part, which maybe we'll get to in a minute, about actually getting that into the Farm Bill. But I want to stick with agriculture for a minute and think about a lot of people have talked about the idea of farms getting too big, and that we're moving towards corporate farming as opposed to small biodiverse organic farms. And you got people on both sides of the spectrum. On the corporate side, they're saying, well, this is the most efficient way to go. We can make the most food for the most people with the least number of resources if we have these big farms and everybody eats white bread. And on the other side, you have people saying like, oh no, it's got to be diverse, and you have to have biodiverse farms, and everything's got to be organic. And we all know, especially those of us who've been in the food industry, that organic stuff is expensive. Right. And you can think like, oh, I want to serve organic, but can I really afford to do it? And you have to make choices. What do you think about the agriculture system? What should we be doing? How do we move forward from here?
I think both sides make a real mistake. There's a fatal flaw in each argument. I think that each side thinks it has to be all one or all the other. And I believe it has to be both and. I mean, we're not becoming more corporate. Corporate agriculture kind of rules the day. It produces, the majority of the food that's available in the world. But it's gone too far. And they haven't answered the question at what cost or at what price efficiency. And because of tax breaks, tax credits, I'm not even talking about agricultural subsidies, because that's actually not that much money when you look at the trillions of dollars that are circulating in the agricultural system. Just a lot of the costs of that style of farming, overuse of water, depleted and vanished water tables, soil erosion, etc. Those companies don't have to pay to repair that damage. So those are called externalities. So communities either have to shut down because they're no longer viable. People have to move, people have to relocate, wages are very, very low in that system, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a lot of things that go into making the price of that efficient, effective food really, really cheap. If you added those externalities, there wouldn't be a huge difference between the cost of a wildly large field of conventionally harvested stuff with a combine that's run by GPS that doesn't even have a driver. There wouldn't be as huge of a price difference. And if organic and biodynamic and resilient kind of multi-subject farmers, diverse planting agriculture, animal, vegetable, and a cereal plant operation enjoyed some of the same tax credits that the big companies did, their food would, this is without agricultural subsidies changing hands. This is just new markets tax credits, incentives for creating jobs in communities, not having to pay state sales tax ever, not having to pay real estate tax on your manufacturing facility because you're creating jobs. If some of those benefits were there for those smaller farmers, their stuff would be maybe less expensive than it is. But the fact is that when we look at the size of our population, we're going to need forms of scaled agriculture. So the question becomes, how do we do that better? How do we use the innovation and the technologies that have been developed to deliver that sans the kind of egregious practices that cause the externalities? Or how do we get these companies to pay for the externalities, because that'll incentivize them to improve their practices, innovate even more? We need both. There are just far too many people on the earth. And I think, quite frankly, people need to start eating a lot less meat because more of our agricultural land that's growing things like corn and soy and oats and grains is going to feed animals. And, so it's just if everybody just, kind of ate red meat maybe like once or twice a week and chicken maybe once or twice a week and had a couple of plant-based days a week, CAFOs would close, and then more land would be available for, eggplant and stuff.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, there's so many benefits. I mean, I am definitely not giving up beef, and I am not giving up bacon either.
Me neither.
But at the same time, I am trying to reduce my portion, and so the days of the 12-ounce or 16-ounce porterhouse steak is gone away. Now we'll cook a 16-ounce porterhouse steak, and we'll feed 6 people on it, and we'll have a big mound of wild rice with loaded with chickpeas and chopped fresh tomatoes and cucumbers on the plate with it. So, and have that, just trying to move that animal protein out of the center of the plate, which is a hard thing to do, even for somebody who's somewhat enlightened, if you want to put it that way.
Or change the protein. I don't know if you know this, Raleigh, but I had one of the things that we did at dressing room, and Lori was really trepidatious about this when I made the decision, but we decided we found this guy, Annie Farrell, who used to be with Millstone Farm, introduced us to this guy, David Hughes, who was growing Red Devon cattle. And he had enough in production because we had enough restaurants who kind of like bought into the idea, and there were families also. But we had to take the whole animal, and the cuts that are the beef part of a Red Devon are like 9% of the entire animal. So we couldn't have steak on the menu anymore. We could only run it as a special. So it was like one of those things. There are some folks on here who may be former customers of Dressing Room, but we used to, do these little sidebar stories on our menu and explain it's like why we only sell steak as a special. And when we explain to people that it's only 10% of the animal, but if you're in on a night and enjoying a steak because you're lucky enough to get one, when you see somebody having a hamburger or the pot roast or the meatloaf, it all came from the same animal. They're like, that's so cool. So it's a little bit of how much do we really need to eat to be healthy? And you do, animal protein is the fastest, most assimilable form of the B vitamins you can get. But when you look at the variety of plants that are out there and different cultures of plant-based cooking and stuff, it's like you can have wild success eating meals complete with protein without a bit of animal in it. And you should do it all. I mean, you should do it all. The key is doing it well, having access to the information and the knowledge, and not being afraid of the techniques that you need to know to be able to do it. And there are so many cookbooks out there. I mean, Jacques does freaking how many videos a day does he post now of him doing stuff? And he's done a lot of vegetarian dishes and stuff. So I think, just like we need to diversify the different forms and different sizes of agriculture that we have, it's incumbent on us as customers of these systems to do the same thing with the way that we shop and the way that we feed our families and the way we entertain our friends. And the great thing about it is we can really have some awesome conversations around the subject matter of why and how we're doing this stuff. Good opportunity to share.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, in the chat there, you're getting some props for your meatloaf at the dressing room. I'm sure now that we know where that beef came from, that must have been a pretty tasty meatloaf. Pamela says it's the best meatloaf she ever had, other than my mom. So that
wow, nice. Awesome. Thank you for that. And I'm also seeing that there's some really awesome vegan bacon out there. So don't forget to send us the source for that.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting, when we fast forward to right now and the pandemic, there were some very interesting shifts that happened over the last 12 months. I mean, whether you were in that sourdough starter club where all of a sudden you realize like, oh, I could have my own sourdough if I just feed it a little bit every day, and I'm going to learn how to bake bread. And there were all kinds of people that were rediscovering cooking or learning how to cook again. Learning how to cook for the first time in their lives. I mean, it was amazing to us at the Jacques Pepin Foundation as we were, posting these videos of Jacques cooking everyday food, how many people said, "Oh my God, I'm just discovering Jacques Pepin for the first time in my life." And we're like, well, that's great. Surprised you didn't find him before, but fantastic that you found. What do you think? When we think about really the pivots that happened in this last year, this idea of baking bread for yourself and cooking more at home and enjoying family dinner around the table. Do you think these pivots are really going to stick? Do you think that we actually changed behavior, or are people just dying to go back to their old ways? What do you think?
No, I think some of it's going to stick. I think, when they're definitely, it depends on the sector, right? There's definitely a cohort of folks who are fortunate enough to be able to take most of their meals at restaurants. Many of those folks, many people in that community live in urban areas with apartments with no kitchen, small kitchen, whatever it might be, but they needed something to do. They wanted to continue to eat well. They knew what good quality was, and they had time on their hands, and the thing that really blew my mind is how people started with sourdough bread. It's like, pick the hardest thing.
Right.
It's like
that is not an easy thing.
Pick the hardest thing,
But it was very nurturing, though. If you're going to keep that sourdough starter alive, you got to take care of it every day, and you get up and you check it and you make sure it's looking right.
But that's a direct relationship with food. That's a great way to kind of define a relationship with food, which you also learn when you're growing and stewarding a plant. It really is. I think seminal. I hope it's here to stay. I had done a couple of panels, actually going back almost a decade, where I felt that people's reliance on restaurants, whether they're upscale restaurants, fast casual, fast food, whatever, was very unsustainable, wildly unsustainable. When you look at, any food operation, the ranges are turned on 24/7, the lights are on because everybody has to see what they're prepping, and just all of the supply chain stuff that goes on to move food around and keep elasticity in that system so that you can offer 250 to 1,500 people a night, depending on the size of your restaurant, how many you're feeding, enough choice to keep them happy. I just, and also just, I didn't think it was sustainable for people to be that disconnected with their food, because when you're not buying something, looking at it yourself, and then preparing and trying it, and then failing at it and saying, okay, I guess I'm not going to do that again, or did I really pick the right piece of produce or the right piece of meat? And they start to get more curious, and they take the deeper dive, and they start being more observant about how they're connecting with food. And then they start getting that curiosity that you and I and so many of our chef colleagues get. Where did it come from? Why is this one better than this one? Maybe I want to get to know someone who's harvesting these scallops and understand what makes them so great. And then you actually learn how they're putting their life on the line pretty much every time they go out to get our food, So I just, that connection, I don't think is sustainable, because I think we'll do best as a world when everybody is operating from the premise that they are, like the guy says on Sims, our best customer is an educated consumer, right? I really believe that. And I do believe that what we did see, for instance, is a lot more people going plant-based, during COVID, a lot more people going to the local farm direct CSA. Those businesses exploded. I did a panel with Rick Bayless and a couple of farmers at Culinary Institute's Menus of Change conference, either last week or the week before. And these two farmers were like, wow, here were our reactions to COVID. scared shitless. Second, wow, what do I do with all this business? And they pivoted. And the thing is that they were able to make investments in their supply chain because they had so many people calling and emailing, going on their online websites, and the websites were crashing. It was easy for them to raise the money that they needed to do the pivots to get through it. So I think, people definitely became more conscious.
Yeah.
And I think you and I know this, Raleigh. It's like, once you've put something amazing in your mouth, and especially once you've done that and you know what the story is behind it, whether it's the person who prepared it for you, the way they told that story, the person who grew the food, whatever it might be, you can't disconnect from that. I don't think there's any going back. I pray that there's no going back. I pray that we've got hundreds of thousands or millions of more people who have connected with food in ways that you and I have, and that they're never going to go back. That's what I pray. I think we're on the verge now of this kind of movement of reckoning where we're going to start to really innovate and fix our food system because the consumer demand is now going to expect more that could actually kind of change the world through food.
That's awesome. I just wanted to reiterate something that, because you piqued my mind there when you were talking about this. I wasn't thinking about the fact that if you were somebody who did like to cook, but you had a busy life pre-pandemic, and you were thinking about like, oh, we should try that meatless Monday thing. Like, the pandemic might have delivered you enough time for the first time in a long time to actually cook and to try something and try some things that were different, and to explore those pathways that were there waiting for you that you had an interest in, but maybe you didn't have time to go down. That's right. Interesting. And great. It's absolutely true that the CSAs exploded because people were like, wait a second, my grocery store doesn't have food, and not only that, I'm scared to go into my grocery store. What's another path here? Like, right. Can I still sign up for that CSA and get it delivered to my house? That's awesome.
Yeah.
One more question before I want to save some time so we can take some questions from our audience. We're getting near the end here, but one thing that really interests me, we're both in the nonprofit sector. You've been doing it for a long time, and you've inspired me in many ways as we started out the Jacques Pepin Foundation. You've done incredible work in Washington and done incredible advocacy work. Just going back to what we were talking about before, that idea that the doubling of SNAP benefits is actually in the Farm Bill now and is permanent and will continue to exist in dozens of states. And how is it, 30 states, 40 states, something like that? A huge number across the country. I think that that's intimidating for some people, though. For people that might be on this call or listening to us talk, they're thinking like, well, I want to make a difference, but can I make a difference? Can I advocate? What can people do?
Well, thank you for that, Raleigh. And I think you're right. And another thing changing the pandemic is more people feel that way too. More people want to do more things. It really shined a very, very stark spotlight on just how unjust our systems are, and that people struggling with poverty, diverse race, ethnicity, a lot of our seniors, and when I say seniors, I mean like my age, people that are like 60 years old and over, who have been pushed out of the job market in favor of younger, less expensive hires, and find themselves in these late life crises. They make up the people who define poverty in this country, and food and nutrition insecurity. And COVID was hospitalizing and killing low-income people that are food and nutrition insecure at the highest rates. 4 of the top 5 comorbidities that were killing people with COVID-19 were diet-related: type 2 diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, all of those, and obesity. All of those things can be prevented or reversed through diet. So, so I think people are more aware that people want to do stuff. And it really is just, you actually can engage. I think one of the problems is that when we really have lost touch with the design of our democratic system. everybody who's sitting like on the Zoom, there are probably a couple of very politically active people on the Zoom, but for the most part, you know, we show up at the polls when candidates have been pre-selected for us. We're no longer engaged in seeing who gets there. You know, who really are the people that we're voting for in our local elections, people that we've done cookouts with, and people that have done potlucks when somebody's mom passed away, or, you know, people that have, you know, come in and figured out ways to create carpooling stuff to get, you know, people's kids to school when gas prices were high and people had lost their jobs, you know, back in the 70s and certain times in the 80s. It's like, those are the people who should be elected for office. The people who actually show that they demonstrate that they care about the people in their community and they're really up on the issues that are important to their neighbors. Those aren't the people that, very few of those people are in any of our local governance, our regional governance, our state offices, and the highest office of land. So everybody needs to re-engage civically in our democratic process that way. It's hard. It's a heavy lift because the system's not set up for it. But then it's like, really, if you look at it, there's Jacques and what you guys do at the Jacques Pepin Foundation, full transparency. I'm on the board. It's an amazing organization that helps people struggling with lack of opportunity get the skills and techniques they need to fill. Well, now it was 600,000 vacancies in the culinary industry. Now it's probably 2.5 million. You know, there's Jose Andres and the work that he does with World Central Kitchen to get really good food, employing kitchen workers at fair wages to become part of the emergency feeding effort. That should be legislated. There's the work of Wholesome Wave. There's so many other young chefs, Kwame Nwache, Manit Chowan, and so many other that are attaching themselves to these charitable causes. And if you love celebrity chefs, find out what they're doing that really makes you tick. If it's paying fair migrant farm worker rights, if it's supporting women's rights in the work environment, a lot of that is being advocated for by chefs in this industry that is historically unkind to that. If it's chefs who are trying to solve food insecurity or hunger, whatever it might be, you can latch on to that. You can donate, you can join their board, or you can subscribe, listen to the newsletters. And when there's an opportunity for you to send a direct non-form letter sign-on, you send an email to a congressperson that you donate to, you know, all that stuff makes a difference. So there's a whole variety of ways that people can get engaged. And I'm talking too long, I apologize.
No, but I think
you know what time it is, he'll tell you how a clock is built.
In addition to making sure that you're involved in the election process, the idea of continuing to communicate with that elected official after they're in office and to let them know what's important to you is huge. I mean, the amount of actual constituent responses that elected legislators get is so small. It's unbelievably small. It takes a very few letters to make a difference.
Yeah, indeed. Agreed. All right. Well, I think we have like 7 minutes left. Do we want to take a couple of these questions, Raleigh? What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't seen a lot of questions recently in the chat.
I see one. I see one is all farmers market. Oh yeah, a lot of them are statements. So all farmers markets in all cities, towns must take EBT food stamps. You know, there's an update there, and that's that most do. So when Wholesome Wave started and we started doing this thing, there were 4,200 farmers markets and less than 50 accepted EBT. And it actually was a technical glitch from the government that really messed it up. And it has since been fixed, but we advocated for that fix. So now there are close to 10,000 farmers markets and over 7,600 accept EBT. So the majority of, it used to be a very scant few, and now the majority of farmers markets do. So I wanted to, you know, just let you know that is on the way, well on its way. And I think, you know, sometime within the next decade, I can't imagine a farmer's market anywhere that's not accepting EBT.
Somebody was just asking about whether crickets were going to become a mainstream food product. I would say, I hope that seaweed gets there first. We'll probably get to crickets, but man, we could do an awful lot with seaweed if people would just accept having it on their plate.
Yeah.
It's easy to grow. There's lots of arable opportunities for it, and lots of different ways to enjoy it. So I would recommend demand seaweed.
Yeah, seaweed and on the bug thing, it's kind of like, dudes, let's really get down to the business of doing with bugs what the Oaxacans do with bugs and what some Asian cultures do with bugs, because right now everyone's like doing flour and that kind of a thing. That's fine, and it's an incredible source of protein, and there's nothing more self-sustaining than a bug. Look how hard they are to get rid of, right? But I'll tell you, man, it's like you take like kind of like those mole fried crickets, or grasshoppers, and put them in a tamale. Holy moly! Our country, Georgia. Let's see.
We could. Quinn Blackman, do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question? I see you have your hand raised.
Hey, Mish and Lori and everybody.
Hey, Quinn.
It's actually Quinn's mom, Leanne.
Yeah, I know Leanne.
I love you guys. I am just like enthralled. I just, this needs to kind of begin at the schools, right? And I know that you've done a lot of work with the local communities. How do we get like programs that are actually started in the high schools at least? And I know it's like you said, writing letters. But I mean, this is kind of like the face of the future. And so are our children. I mean, it's going to be beyond us.
Yeah, agreed. And I think Leanne, the answer to that is you kind of get your opportunity to actually have a domino effect impact. It's, get in there and really make sure you're engaged in who's getting elected to the school board. Maybe even if there's an opening, run for a position, or if you know somebody who's really, really active and has good ideas, is engaged and energetic, who has leadership qualities, make sure you work with your neighbors to get them a seat. What's missing is organized home ec curriculum where people not only learn how to cook and garden, but balance a checkbook. These are life skills. That whole notion of getting kids, the minute you get a kid to grow, you try to get a kid to eat zucchini if they've never grown a plant, good luck. Give them a zucchini plant and they grow the zucchini plant. It's got like 4 or 5 or 10 zucchinis on it. They're eating that zucchini. It's theirs. They own it, but again, a lot of this has to do with policy and funding, and school boards are going to fund what they're incentivized to fund most if there isn't some kind of pressure from the community to really understand what's most important to the community as a whole.
And I would follow up on that. We live in Rhode Island, just outside of Providence, and Rhode Island's actually a pretty active state in the sense that we have a food policy council, the Rhode Island Food Policy Council, which is sort of oversees a lot of the food system questions that are coming up. And under that, we actually have the Rhode Island Healthy Schools Initiative, which is designed to get education in early and to get the students the younger students connected with the farms and get them out there. And I believe that all came out of school board initiatives. So, the old statement that, all politics is local means more now than it ever did. And the idea of getting onto a school board in order to push for these kinds of changes that you want is not out of the question. And you can have more of a voice than you think, as long as you put a little energy into it. Everybody's got a bullhorn. We just got to let them use it.
Yeah. Okay, so cool. So let's do Joyce and Nico, and I'll get to the Bill Gates thing before we split if I can find it in the chat.
Hi, Michelle. How are you?
Hi, Joyce.
So my question really was based on the woman's question that was in the chat, which was
the GMO. Okay, cool. All right. Yeah, got it.
Like
okay.
two parts, right? He's buying up all the agricultural land, and he is remains very pro GMO and pesticide use. So there's two things right there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And one thing that I'll say, so Anne, I know you're on. If you could share all the chat stuff I'd be happy because there aren't a bunch of questions, and I'd be happy to send you an email answering all the questions and then giving people access. I think, Bill Gates, he's a scientist, he's a science guy, he's a science geek. And there are some efficiencies. I mean, for the record, I am not anti-GMO. I'm anti certain types of GMO. I do not believe in the Terminator gene, that you put into corn so that if you save the seeds of the corn that you planted and you plant it, it's sterile so it won't grow into a corn plant. I'm not into that. It ensures your market and that people are going to buy your seeds every year. And also GMO modifications so that you can continue to dump these pesticides. Not into that. But I think, coming up with drought resistant rice in areas of the world where water is becoming an issue, that's a worthy scientific endeavor. And something that I don't think we have a choice, because we can't rely on the human race to unwind global warming. So I'm not anti-GMO. I'm for, how do we actually vet it in a way that we know the type of science that's happening is stuff that's absolutely necessary, so that people in areas of the world who now find themselves in abject poverty because they once were self-reliant, because they could grow their own food, can continue to do so. How do we look at relocation to get people into areas where they can continue to farm, still have rightful access to land? These are all big questions. My thing is he's focusing on one thing, not enough on the other stuff. And he can be myopic that way. And I think that he's someone who actually responds to public comment. Right, the guy. Again, I think we have to look at every arrow in the quiver if we're going to feed a growing world population. We're a little bit over time, but thank you for that, Joyce. It's very good to see you, and I want to go to Nico.
Hi. Oh my goodness. I'm kind of nervous, so please excuse me.
Don't
But
get nervous.
I just want to thank you guys for everything that you do. I mean, I'm a woman of color from Chicago, and I've always been in love with food. And I just started my organization, Seeds for Health, and you've actually liked some of the things on it. So thank you for that. That was such an honor. And
great organization.
Thank you.
Great mission.
Because you're right. I realized as working in the restaurant industry, I've been a head wine steward, I've been a restaurant manager, I've been a bartender, I've been at almost every job in the industry. And I realized that as I'm studying functional medicine and nutrition, and my son is on the autism spectrum, and I realized when I changed his diet, he's flourishing. He's doing so much better. I know everyone is different, but you guys have kind of answered my question on how do I get out there so people can understand what I do, so that people can see that you can eat healthy. And I try to make make sure that I make all of my recipes under $1 a serving and support CSAs and local farms. But I feel like when I talk to people about it, it just kind of gets looked over. When I try to make the calls to the city, no one's answering my calls. When I'm trying to get a concession stand in the parks for kids to have healthy snacks instead of chips and things,
Yeah.
I'm just getting looked over, and it's really
well,
it's really
so I'm gonna apologize for saying this, but you are a woman, that is against you in some of this outreach,
Yeah.
and you're Black, that's against you in some of this outreach. But what we'll do is we'll take this offline, because we have a connection with a variety of folks in Chicago in the culinary industry who are
Well,
really
I'm in Florida now. My mother's still in Chicago, and she works as a chef, and she cooks very healthy as well. But I'm in Florida.
Oh, we got peeps in Florida too.
Florida.
Yeah, no worries. We got peeps in Florida too. So, I mean, we got a network, so we'll take that offline and stuff like that. And I think it's just really getting you connected in with some allies who already might have some connections to folks in policy and stuff like that, because what you're talking about is good, it's ready, it's smart. And frankly, there's a book in it. When you've got something that's like a buck a serving, we'll talk offline about how you should start that endeavor.
But I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, because people don't know, like, representation and looking out for us, and meaning, I don't mean to make this about color, but like, so many people don't realize that I even realized, and I've been fortunate enough to travel and see things and make recipes, but so many people don't realize that when you give people food and you put produce in their hand and they don't know what to do with it, it just goes to waste in their refrigerator. They just throw it out. They have no idea. And so I love that you saw that problem, because people just don't know. They don't know what to do. We just give them canned food and we make them, you know, less healthy. And I'm going through my health struggles as well, but I'm learning. I'm getting better every day. I get better, but I just thank you. And I'm sorry, I'm going on.
You're welcome. It's all good. We'll stay in touch. DM me on Instagram, and we'll reconnect and stuff like that. So there's one last question I'm going to answer because I can't help it. Are food stores able to donate leftover food that is expired but still safe to eat? Yeah, I mean that is the food bank system, actually. So there's the sell by date, which often is enforced by the retailer, that really forces the type of inventory turnover that allows them to control the value in the expense of their inventory. It's in their interest to turn it over. So the sell by date has nothing to do with the quality of most food. I mean, a lot of processed food can last 10 years, and a lot of it's even safe beyond the expiration date. The difficulty and the challenge becomes when you start talking about produce and dairy and other things like that. And those are the things that are tougher to get donated in the food bank system. And a lot of these food banks get stuck doing everything they're already doing. And then they were forced to be drive-by food pantries in COVID. And now they have to buy refrigeration, and they often have to raise more money to buy produce so that the produce lasts long enough in someone's groceries or someone's refrigerator. So it's still a conundrum. That's why we believe in the incentives. We legislated them in 2018, named after my late co-founder, Gus Schumacher. We would love to see more and more public support in food stamps, where people get more food stamp money, but the extra money can only be spent on healthy things. So there's more food in the budget, but then we can actually direct people to specific food groups that you can then provide education for. So no one's going to turn down the food when you're trying to get your kids raised and intelligent and you want them to eat well. So good stuff. And I'm going to stop because I could talk forever.
And we'd probably need a whole nother hour, Michel, for you to introduce everybody to the fruits and vegetables prescription program that you're just getting off the ground here, which we hope to see in real life soon.
Yep. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. I can't thank you guys. My goodness, what an education we have had in this last hour. Raleigh and Michel, thank you so much for the time that you have put into this. I can't wait to read more, learn more, follow more, advocate more. And I'm pretty sure that that's where every attendee is sitting right about now. As folks know, I try to introduce what's next in the What's Cooking series. And we are super excited on July 19th. It kind of segues off of what Michel was talking about. We have food writer Alec Lebrano. He's going to be discussing his new book, My Place at the Table. That's on Monday, July 19th at 6:30 p.m. It will also be virtual, so you can do it in your backyard garden like Michel is doing, or in your office like Raleigh is doing, wherever suits you. It's a charming, gripping, and often poignant My Place at the Table is a coming-of-age story that vividly recounts how a timid boy in the suburbs of Connecticut became one of the most influential dining critics and food writers in France. Alec Lebrano grew up in Connecticut, and he lived in Boston, New York, and London before moving to Paris, his home today, in 1986. He was a European correspondent for Gourmet magazine from 1999 until it closed in 2009, and has written about food and travel for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, Bon Appetit, Food and Wine, Travel and Leisure, Condé Nast, and many other publications in the United States. So definitely register. We'll send you the link. Also in September, We have a very exciting lineup. Michelle is going to hopefully help us with something else that we're literally cooking on. So stay tuned for that. There's a little teaser there. And the best way to stay informed is, of course, through our newsletter, through social media posts, and emails. So we'll look forward to seeing you there. Be well, everyone. Michelle and Raleigh, again, thank you so much for all of your time and expertise.
Thank you, Ann. Thanks, Raleigh. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks for
So
joining us.
see you soon.
Thank you.